Ark Survival Ascended has a massive issue, and in today's video I'm going to share with you what that is and what I would tell Wildcard on how to solve it, as it is a problem that they've deliberately put in themselves. If you notice, the game is running reasonably smoothly at the moment, apart from all the stuttering. It is about a 60 constant, except the FPS values are just lower because it's struggling with the stuttering. And you might think, considering we're running 1440p max settings pretty much, apart from like the foliage stuff and all of the shadows, they're on a little bit lower, that's pretty good performance coming from ASA. Now, the fact that it's on a 3090 and that's an expensive GPU is a whole nother issue in itself, and the fact that the game struggles on slower GPUs that really shouldn't struggle with a game like this is another issue in itself, which is not what we're talking about today, because we're not talking about the sort of terrible performance in this game to some extent. We're talking about this weird scandal with ASA, and you can see it in the settings. So if you didn't know, recently FSR frame generation was added, and now there is no frame generation setting in here. Obviously there's DLSS still, that's always been in the settings menu, but there also used to be just frame generation as well in here, DLSS frame generation, which is now gone as well. You can see here in my other settings it says graphics preset custom, advanced graphics on medium, then epic, high, etc. So you can see all of that, and these are on pretty low, and in advanced settings they're that. So and we're at 1440p as well, and I've capped it to 60 obviously, but there's no frame generation setting. And the reason for this is the fact that there literally is frame generation on, but now Wildcard doesn't let you choose to have frame generation on, and they force it enabled, essentially making the frame rate seem higher to make the game sort of just perform better for everyone that hasn't turned on frame generation. And this is an issue because if you take this video from Zworms Gaming, you can see that the frame time graph is all over the place, and sadly my MSI afterburner isn't working, so I can't show that myself. I just have to deal with this sort of crappy Nvidia display here. But yeah, that's not really what should be coming through, and you can tell it is because it is frame generation. Because let's say I'm gonna cap my frame rate to 15 frames per second and then keep it like that, you'll see with the added frame generation it's over 15 FPS. You can see if I just put it over some green, it all will be zoomed in, but that's 30 frames per second, and we've locked it to 15. Frame generation is working here, and frame generation is making the frame rate higher. This should read 15 frames per second, but no, it's reading 30 frames per second, and apparently the latency is 0 milliseconds. And frame generation isn't working properly here, which is probably why you can't really feel it. I'll put it back up to 60, but I do want to show you 30. And if I cap it to 30, it should keep it up at about 60 FPS. And now that's feeling like what it did before, and you can see 60, but we're only actually getting 30 frames per second here. So that's really odd. And if frame generation wasn't on right now, if I just put it to my usual 60 cap, so it should be able to go up to 120, except I've got some extra things on which cap it to 60, so it won't go above 60, because you can see my utilization still isn't full. It's running at like 40 FPS, and that is what it used to run at before frame generation. Now, I already had frame generation on because I used a mod to add frame generation onto this game, and that was perfectly fine, and I prefer it with frame generation on because it's smoother and the latency isn't all too bad. Personally, I think there really shouldn't be a need for frame generation, FSR frame generation on the 3090 with a game like this. It should run well enough on the 3090, considering that the recommended requirements lists a 3080, which is insane for a recommended GPU. And it's like, I'm not even running like anywhere near full settings. I do have quite a lot of bells and whistles on. At the lowest settings, I can get it to probably run at about 70 FPS without any frame generation at 1440p. Changing the resolution doesn't really make all too much difference, but this forced frame generation really is the issue here, in my opinion. And you can sort of see it on the character. There's a lot of ghosting and things like that. And I wonder if it's also been implemented into the console releases. I just like the game still looks pretty decent, but the fact they've forced frame generation on and there's not an option to turn it off unless you go into like the game config files and turns it off, but it will also turn it back on again, so you can't even do that if you want to turn it off. There is a feature for it in the games files, and then you can see, look, that stutter was so long. That's not your phone's Wi-Fi or anything like that. That is also the game stuttering as well, but that's to do with some other performance issues. And you can see like all the ghosting with frame generation. If you look over like the UI, the frame rate is lower on everything, so it all looks choppy over the item slot UI compared to the actual game. There's so many telltale signs that this is using frame generation, but why they've put frame generation on by default and there's no setting for you to turn it off, like if it just defaulted to have frame generation on and then you could turn it off, that's fine if you want to turn it off. But I think the fact that they forced it and hidden all the frame generation settings really delivers a different story, in my opinion, because come on, Wildcard, you don't have to force frame generation just to get out of the way that your game isn't performing like it should, because it adds about 30 to 50% of the performance. Again, I should be getting about 40 frames per second here, and you can see 56 is what it's reading at the moment, 55, 54, but it's CPU bound at the moment more than GPU bound. You can see my GPU usage is only about 70-80%. Now I do have a 3800X, so that's not the best in CPU specs, but still I think the fact that frame generation is forced, it's a bad sign coming from Wildcard in my opinion. And you know, the game runs poorly enough, you might as well try and optimize it so it starts running better instead of hiding the fact that the game runs badly by just putting frame generation on it and then trying to make everyone think that, oh my god, look at this game, it's running so much better than before, my frames are so much higher than previously, even though they've just simply turned frame generation on by default, and you know, they haven't, and they've hidden it away from you so players don't know that they've got frame generation on by default. And the only reason I knew of this is because of the Zworms video as well that he did almost 2 weeks back now, and you know, it really shocked me, but I decided I might as well install ASA and just check it out for myself, and it is all there too. So it really is a shame, and I do hope Wildcard fixes and addresses this. And also, if you do have any ways of contacting Wildcard or letting them know through forums or whatever, then please do, as this is an issue which in my opinion needs solving, because come on, you shouldn't force frame generation on players. And the only reason I can possibly think of why they've done this is so the game runs better than it originally did, because there's frame generation on it now instead of there not being frame generation, and that's trying to force players into thinking, oh, the game runs better. But once you know frame generation's enabled by default, you can see all the signs and the game still stutters like crazy and you've got that terrible frame graph. It really does show you the full story, and I think it is a shame, really. But that is where I'm going to end today's video. So please, if you can, tell everyone else about this who has got ASA, and check if you console players have the same issue too. As far as I'm concerned, it's probably only on PC, but I wouldn't be shocked if they did the same on consoles as well. So please do spread the word, spread the awareness about this, as Wildcard does need to resolve this, and know that this is wrong, because this is not what they should be doing with ASA. They should be trying to improve the performance of the game rather than just hiding the fact that the game doesn't run good and just chucking frame generation on it to make it seem like it will run better for everyone else. That's my rant done. Again, tell anyone you can, spread the word, and I'll see you all in the next one, hopefully with a lighter topic. Bye. And give it up for our patrons, Ekaterina Puchkova and Karina Thorne, Dominic Macy-Juski, sorry about that name, and everyone else that's on this list. All the people I've mentioned are paid members, and if you feel like that's something you want a shout out at the end of the video, go join the Patreon or become a paid YouTube member.